Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we dive into the heart of extraordinary journeys that remind us of the power of love, resilience, and redemption. Today, we bring you a captivating tale of unexpected connections, transformation, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Get ready to be inspired. The sprawling estate of Eric Townsend stood like a monument to power and wealth in Charleston, South Carolina. Its manicured gardens and towering columns hinted at the immense fortune Eric had amassed over decades of relentless ambition. But beyond the grandeur, Eric was a man ruled by rigid principles. His world revolved around legacy and status, and nothing mattered more to him than ensuring the Townsend name remained untarnished. His only son, Logan Townsend, was expected to follow in his footsteps and uphold this legacy. But Logan had a heart that beat to a different rhythm. At 25, Logan was the antithesis of his father. Where Eric saw the world in terms of power and control, Logan saw beauty and potential. He loved art, music, and the stories of ordinary people, while Eric viewed Charleston's bustling streets as a playground for influence. Logan wandered them to connect with the people who lived on their edges. From street performers to struggling artists, Logan immersed himself in their lives, seeking meaning beyond the confines of his family's wealth. For years, Logan had tried to balance his respect for his father with his desire to forge his own path. But as he grew older, Eric's expectations became suffocating. The breaking point came one morning during breakfast in the Townsend Mansion's grand dining room. Logan, absent-mindedly sketching on a napkin, was jolted back to reality by Eric's booming voice. "It's time for you to think seriously about your future, Logan," Eric declared, setting down his coffee cup with a decisive clink. "You're not a child anymore. It's time you settled down." Logan sighed, setting his pen aside. "I'm not against the idea, Dad, but I'd like to marry someone I love, not someone who fits into a plan." Eric's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp. "Love is a luxury, not a necessity. A marriage should strengthen the family name, ensure our legacy. That's the only thing that matters." The conversation escalated into an argument, one that left Logan feeling more alienated than ever. Eric's insistence on an arranged marriage, purely for status, clashed with Logan's deeply held belief that love should be the foundation of such a commitment. The tension simmered for days, until fate intervened in an unexpected way. One afternoon, as Logan strolled through Charleston's historic streets, he noticed a young woman sitting quietly near a bustling square. Her clothes were worn, and her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. But there was a quiet dignity about her. She held a small sketch pad, her fingers smudged with charcoal as she captured the scene around her. Intrigued, Logan approached. "Hi," he said, offering a gentle smile. "That's a beautiful sketch. May I see it?" The woman looked up, startled. Her name was Sophie, and she had been living on the streets for over a year. At first, she hesitated, unsure if Logan's interest was genuine. But something in his demeanor, kind and unassuming, put her at ease. She handed him the sketch pad, and Logan was struck by the depth of emotion in her work. "This is incredible," he said, flipping through the pages. "You have real talent." Sophie shrugged, her voice tinged with both pride and resignation. "It's just something I do to keep myself sane." Over the next hour, they talked. Sophie shared fragments of her story, how she had lost her parents young, how a series of unfortunate events had led her to where she was now. Logan listened intently, captivated by her resilience and the spark of hope that remained despite her hardships. When Logan returned home, his mind was filled with thoughts of Sophie. But his budding admiration for her would soon collide with his father's latest scheme. Eric, having learned of Logan's growing interest in Sophie, decided to intervene. He viewed her as a distraction, a threat to the Townsend name, in a move both cruel and calculated. Eric ordered Logan to marry Sophie. He saw this as a punishment, a way to humiliate Logan and dissuade him from pursuing such foolish connections in the future. Logan was stunned when Eric presented the ultimatum. The very idea of forcing Sophie into such a situation felt wrong. and he couldn't understand how his father could be so callous. But Eric's resolve was unshakable. "You want to defy me?" he said coldly. "Then prove you're willing to take responsibility for your choices." Faced with no real choice, Logan approached Sophie to explain the situation. It was one of the most difficult conversations of his life. He found her in the same square, sketching as usual. When he sat beside her and began to speak, she listened in stunned silence. "You're asking me to marry you," she said finally, her voice laced with disbelief. "Because your father wants to teach you a lesson?" Logan nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I know how absurd it sounds, but I promise, Sophie, I would never treat you with anything less than respect. If you agree to this, I'll make sure you're safe and comfortable. I'll do everything I can to make this as easy as possible for you." Sophie's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of marrying someone from such a different world, for such an unorthodox reason, was overwhelming. But as she looked into Logan's eyes, she saw sincerity. He wasn't like the other wealthy men she had encountered, arrogant and dismissive. He seemed genuinely kind, and despite the strangeness of the proposal, she felt an odd sense of trust. After a long pause, she nodded. "Okay, Logan, I'll do it, but only because I believe you mean what you say." The days leading up to the wedding were surreal. Instead of the grand celebrations Eric had envisioned for his son, the ceremony was a modest affair, attended only by a handful of people. Sophie wore a simple dress borrowed from a local thrift shop, and Logan stood by her side with a quiet determination. They exchanged vows under the watchful eye of Eric, who remained stoic throughout the proceedings. News of the marriage spread quickly through Charleston's elite circles, sparking gossip and scandal. Many questioned Eric's judgment, wondering if he had finally lost his edge. But Eric remained steadfast in his belief that this mistake would soon be corrected. He was certain that Logan would grow to resent Sophie, and the marriage would dissolve, leaving his son chastened and ready to embrace the family's expectations. What Eric didn't anticipate was the connection that would form between Logan and Sophie in the days and weeks that followed. While their marriage began as an arrangement, it quickly became something more. Logan, true to his word, treated Sophie with respect and kindness. He introduced her to his world without arrogance, patiently helping her navigate the unfamiliar territory of wealth and privilege. For Sophie, the adjustment was challenging. She often felt out of place in the Townsend mansion, where every corner seemed to whisper a reminder of her differences. But Logan's unwavering support gave her strength. He encouraged her to pursue her art, helping her set up a small studio in one of the mansion's and used rooms. For the first time in years, Sophie began to dream again. Their bond deepened as they spent more time together. Logan was captivated by Sophie's resilience and the depth of her creativity, while Sophie found herself drawn to Logan's compassion and genuine nature. The lines between their worlds began to blur, and a sense of partnership began to take root. Both of them knew that their relationship was unconventional, but they also sensed that it had the potential to become something truly meaningful. As they stood at the precipice of an uncertain future, Logan and Sophie couldn't yet see how their lives would change in ways neither of them could have imagined. As the first weeks of their unconventional marriage unfolded, Sophie felt as though she were living in a surreal dream. The Townsend mansion, with its sweeping staircase and gleaming chandeliers, was a world away from the streets of Charleston where she had spent most of her life. Despite Logan's warmth and support, Sophie struggled to find her footing in this unfamiliar world. Each morning, she would wake in a room too grand to feel real, the sunlight filtering through silk curtains, and remind herself that this was her new reality. Logan, for his part, made every effort to ease Sophie's transition. He had always been kind, but now there was a new layer of attentiveness in his actions. He would make sure she had everything she needed and took it upon himself to guide her through the complexities of high society life. From explaining the intricacies of dinner table etiquette to introducing her to his circle of acquaintances, Logan approached each interaction with a quiet determination to make her feel at ease. One afternoon, as Sophie sketched in her makeshift studio, Logan entered carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of tea. He placed the tray on a nearby table and glanced at her work. The charcoal sketch depicted a quiet Charleston street corner, a place she had often visited during her most difficult days. "You're incredibly talented," Logan said, his voice soft but earnest. "You see beauty in places most people would overlook." Sophie looked up, offering a small smile. "It's just a way to process everything I've been through. I never thought anyone would actually care about my work." Logan leaned against the table, his gaze unwavering. "I care, Sophie, and I think others would too. Have you ever considered showing your art to the world?" The thought made her heart race. She had always seen her sketches as deeply personal, a way to cope rather than something to share. "I don't think I'm ready for that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan didn't press the issue, but left her with an encouraging smile. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here to support you." As their bond grew stronger, Eric watched from a distance, his frustration mounting. He had hoped that the marriage would prove to be a temporary lesson, forcing Logan to abandon his ideals and return to the family's traditions. Instead, he saw a closeness developing between Logan and Sophie that unsettled him. Sophie, with her quiet resilience, had a way of defying his expectations. Eric couldn't help but notice the warmth she brought into Logan's life, a warmth he had never fully understood or valued. Determined to reassert control, Eric invited Logan to his study for a private conversation. The room, with its dark wood paneling and shelves lined with leather-bound books, exuded authority, and Logan felt the weight of his father's scrutiny as he entered. "Logan," Eric began, his tone measured but stern, "I've been observing how things are progressing between you and Sophie." Logan met his father's gaze, a mixture of defiance and curiosity in his eyes. "And?" Eric leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "You've done well in making the best of this situation. But let's not forget why it happened in the first place. Don't lose sight of what's expected of you." Logan's jaw tightened. "What's expected of me, Dad, is to live a life dictated by your rules. But I've started to see that there's more to life than following a plan someone else made for me." Eric's eyes narrowed. "You think this experiment with Sophie will lead to something lasting? She's not one of us, Logan. You can't build a legacy on sentimentality." Logan stood, his voice steady but firm. "Maybe it's not about legacy, Dad. Maybe it's about living a life that feels true. Sophie is more than you think she is, and I'm starting to realize she's exactly what I needed to see the world differently." Eric said nothing as Logan walked out, but the conversation left a lingering tension between them. For the first time, Logan felt a sense of liberation, as though he was stepping out from beneath his father's shadow. His resolve to support Sophie and build something genuine with her only strengthened. Meanwhile, Sophie began to explore her own place within the Townsend world. One day, while browsing through Logan's extensive library, she stumbled upon a collection of books about art history and famous painters. Inspired, she began experimenting with different techniques, transforming her sketches into vivid paintings. Each piece reflected a fragment of her journey, moments of struggle, resilience, and hope. Logan noticed the shift in her work and suggested they visit a local gallery owned by his friend Clara, an accomplished art curator. Sophie hesitated at first, her insecurities bubbling to the surface. But Logan's encouragement gave her the courage to agree. Clara was immediately taken with Sophie's art. "These pieces have so much emotion," she said, examining one of Sophie's paintings. "They tell a story that people need to hear." Encouraged by Clara's enthusiasm, Sophie allowed her paintings to be featured in a small exhibit at the gallery. On the night of the exhibit, Sophie stood nervously in a corner, watching as people admired her work. Logan stayed by her side, his presence a steadying force. "You did this," Logan said, his voice filled with pride. "You deserve every bit of recognition you're getting tonight." Sophie glanced at him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." As the evening progressed, Sophie found herself speaking with art enthusiasts and collectors who praised her talent. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, a validation that transcended the struggles of her past. The success of the exhibit marked a turning point, not only in Sophie's life, but also in her relationship with Logan. They began to see each other as partners, united by a shared sense of purpose. But even as Sophie and Logan's connection deepened, the specter of Eric's disapproval loomed over them. Eric, unable to accept the growing strength of their bond, began plotting ways to dismantle the marriage. His determination to protect the Townsend legacy blinded him to the genuine love blossoming between his son and Sophie. For now, though, Logan and Sophie remained blissfully unaware of Eric's machinations. Together, they continued to navigate their unorthodox union, finding solace in each other's presence and inspiration in their shared dreams. As they stood on the threshold of an uncertain future, both were filled with a quiet hope that their love would be enough to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. The days after Sophie's gallery debut felt like a whirlwind. The once shy artist, who had spent years sketching in the shadows, was now receiving invitations to participate in exhibitions and collaborate with other creators. For the first time, Sophie felt seen not as a beggar or a charity case, but as someone with a voice worth hearing. Logan, ever supportive, became her biggest cheerleader, proudly introducing her to anyone who would listen. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. At every event, Logan was by Sophie's side, his easy smile a stark contrast to her modest demeanor. They had a rhythm now, Logan's confidence balancing Sophie's quiet strength. When the guests would leave and the applause faded, they'd retreat to the solace of the Townsend mansion, where their conversations would stretch late into the night. "You're different than I imagined when we first met," Sophie admitted one evening as they shared a quiet dinner in the garden. The soft glow of string lights cast warm shadows on their faces. Logan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "And how exactly did you imagine me?" Sophie hesitated, a small smile playing on her lips. "Spoiled, arrogant, the kind of person who only cares about appearances." He raised an eyebrow, feigning offense. "And what changed your mind? You showed me more of who you are. You're not just the rich son of Eric Townsend. You're kind, genuine. You've given me more than I ever thought I deserved." Logan leaned forward, his voice tender. "You deserve it all along, Sophie. You just needed someone to remind you." As their bond deepened, Logan began to realize that his feelings for Sophie went beyond obligation or support. Her resilience, her ability to transform pain into beauty, captivated him. For Sophie, Logan's steady presence gave her a sense of security she hadn't known since her childhood. Yet, despite their growing affection, both were aware of the unspoken challenges lingering on the horizon. Eric, ever watchful, saw the changes in his son and grew increasingly frustrated. In his eyes, Sophie's success in the art world was an unintended consequence of his punishment, and her bond with Logan threatened to undermine the Townsend legacy. Determined to put an end to what he considered a mistake, Eric began orchestrating a plan to separate the two. One morning, Logan found himself summoned to Eric's study. The heavy oak door creaked as Logan stepped inside, and the tension in the air was palpable. "I've been observing the two of you," Eric began, his tone measured but icy. "It seems this arrangement has gone too far." Logan's jaw tightened. "It's not an arrangement anymore, Dad. Sophie's my wife, and we're building something real." Eric scoffed, rising from his chair and pacing the room. "Real? You think a marriage built on defiance can last? This woman doesn't belong in our world. Logan, she's a distraction, and you're letting her derail your future." Logan squared his shoulders, his voice firm. "Sophie isn't a distraction. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And maybe it's time you realize that your version of the future isn't the only one that matters." Eric's face darkened, his frustration boiling over. "You think you're defying me for love, but you're being naive. When the novelty wears off and reality sets in, you'll see that I was right." But Logan didn't flinch. "The only thing I see clearly, Dad, is that Sophie makes me a better man. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who needs to reevaluate." For the first time, Logan walked away from his father's expectations without hesitation. The weight that had always hung over him, Eric's approval. The family name seemed lighter with every step. He knew he couldn't change his father, but he could change how he lived his own life. Meanwhile, Sophie continued to thrive. Clara, her gallery friend, became a close confidant, helping Sophie navigate the complexities of her growing reputation. Yet, despite the outward success, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that her happiness with Logan was precarious. Eric's looming disapproval and the whispers of high society cast a shadow over her accomplishments. One evening, as Sophie prepared for another exhibition, Clara pulled her aside. "You know, Sophie, you've done something remarkable. You've risen above everything they said about you." Sophie smiled faintly. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough. If people will ever see me for more than my past." "They already do," Clara said firmly. "But you need to stop doubting yourself. Logan believes in you, and so do I." Sophie nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. Clara's words gave her a flicker of hope, but the fear of losing everything she had built with Logan remained. That fear came to a head when Eric, desperate to reclaim control, took his interference to the next level. He began spreading rumors among his influential peers, insinuating that Sophie was using Logan for his wealth and status. The whispers quickly escalated, and soon, Sophie found herself at the center of a storm she hadn't created. Logan was furious when he discovered what his father had done. Confronting Eric, he demanded an end to the sabotage. "You can't control everything, Dad, and you can't control me anymore. If you want to push Sophie away, you'll have to push me away too." Eric, for the first time, hesitated. His son's defiance was unlike anything he had ever faced. But his pride wouldn't let him back down, and the rift between father and son grew deeper. Sophie, determined not to let Eric's schemes destroy her, leaned on Logan and Clara for support. She poured her emotions into her art, creating pieces that spoke of resilience, love, and the fight to overcome adversity. Each stroke of her brush became an act of defiance, a way to reclaim her narrative from the forces trying to diminish her. The climax of the tension came during a high-profile charity gala. Sophie's paintings were the centerpiece of the event, drawing acclaim from critics and collectors alike. As she stood beside Logan, receiving praise for her work, Eric watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. For Logan and Sophie, the gala was a moment of triumph, a declaration that their bond was stronger than the forces trying to break it. But for Eric, it was a moment of reckoning. Watching Sophie shine in a world he once thought she didn't belong to, he began to question the beliefs that had driven his actions. The evening ended with Logan and Sophie walking hand in hand under the Charleston moonlight. Though challenges remained, they had proven to themselves and to the world that their love was worth fighting for. Yet, neither could shake the feeling that the battle with Eric was far from over. The morning after the gala, the Townsend mansion was unusually quiet. Sophie awoke with a sense of unease, as if the calmness was only a prelude to a storm. Logan had already left for an early meeting, and Sophie found herself alone, her thoughts circling Eric's cold gaze at the gala. She couldn't ignore the weight of his disapproval and the lingering whispers that followed her success. Determined not to let Eric define her worth, Sophie decided to confront him. She had spent too much of her life being overlooked and underestimated. Now, she would speak for herself. Walking into his study, she found him seated at his imposing mahogany desk, the room filled with an air of authority. Eric barely looked up. "Sophie, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I'm here because I deserve to be heard. I know you don't approve of me, Eric, but I'm not going to let you undermine my life or my marriage to Logan." He leaned back, a smirk forming. "So, you think you figured it all out? You believe a few paintings and public praise change who you are? They don't change who I am," Sophie countered, her eyes unwavering. "They reveal who I've always been, someone who worked through pain and hardship, someone who doesn't give up easily. And despite what you think, I'm not here for your wealth or your approval. Eric's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly masked it with sarcasm. So, you're a martyr now? A saintly figure who's come to save my son from his own family? Sophie's jaw tightened. I'm not saving Logan. We're building something together, something real. And if you can't see that, then I feel sorry for you. Because while you're busy holding on to your pride, you're losing the chance to know your son, to see the man he's become. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time, Eric looked at Sophie not with disdain, but with a flicker of something else. Perhaps respect. Perhaps guilt. Before he could respond, Sophie turned and walked out, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if she had gotten through to him, but she knew she had said what needed to be said. Logan returned that evening, his face lit with excitement. I've been thinking, Sophie, he said as he joined her in the sitting room. What if we host an open house at the mansion? Turn it into a space where your art and other artists' work can be celebrated. It could also serve as a community hub, a way to bring people together. Sophie's eyes widened, her mind already envisioning the possibilities. You really think we can do that? Logan grinned. Why not? This place has been a symbol of control for too long. Let's turn it into something that represents creativity and connection. As they planned the event, Sophie felt a renewed sense of purpose. Logan's unwavering support gave her strength. And together, they began transforming the mansion into a welcoming space. Word spread quickly, and soon, local artists and community members were eager to participate. The day of the open house arrived, and the mansion buzzed with life. The grand hall, once reserved for high society gatherings, was now filled with vibrant paintings, sculptures, and music. Sophie moved through the crowd, greeting guests and soaking in the warmth of the moment. For the first time, the mansion felt alive in a way it never had before. Logan stood by her side, his pride evident. Look at what you've created, he said, his voice full of admiration. We've created this, Sophie corrected, squeezing his hand. I couldn't have done it without you. But amidst the joy of the event, Sophie noticed Eric standing near the edge of the room, his face unreadable. She hadn't expected him to attend, and his presence made her uneasy. She watched as he moved through the crowd, pausing to examine one of her paintings, a piece depicting a lone figure standing against a storm. He turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. This one, he said quietly, gesturing to the painting. It speaks of resilience, of standing firm when everything feels against you. Sophie nodded, unsure of his intentions. It's a reflection of what I've lived through and what I've learned. Eric's gaze lingered on the painting before he spoke again. You've proven me wrong, Sophie. I thought I could control everything, but I see now that I've been blind. You've brought something to Logan's life that I never could, a sense of purpose, of authenticity. For that, I owe you an apology. The words took Sophie by surprise, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Thank you, Eric, she said finally. I hope this can be a step toward building something better for all of us. As the evening drew to a close, Sophie and Logan stood together on the mansion's balcony, overlooking the garden where guests lingered under the glow of string lights. Sophie leaned into Logan's embrace, her heart full but cautious. Do you think this will last? She asked softly. Logan kissed her forehead. We've made it this far, haven't we? And no matter what happens, we'll face it together. Their bond had been tested, their dreams had been questioned, but in that moment, Sophie felt a quiet strength that reassured her. The open house had been more than an event. It was a declaration of who they were and the life they were building. One step at a time, the weeks after the open house marked a turning point for Sophie, Logan, and Eric. The event had not only brought people together, but had also opened the door for change within the Townsend family. Sophie felt a cautious optimism as she immersed herself in her art, inspired by the transformation happening around her. Eric's apology, though unexpected, left a lingering impression. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. Sophie found herself reflecting on the man who had caused her so much anguish and yet had shown vulnerability in that brief moment. Logan, ever the optimist, encouraged her to keep an open heart. believing that healing was possible even for someone like his father. One afternoon, Eric approached Sophie in the mansion's garden. The air was crisp, and the autumn leaves painted the scene with hues of gold and red. Sophie was tending to a small flower bed, a new project she had started to bring more life to the once sterile grounds. Eric stood nearby, watching her work before finally speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that day in my study," he began, his tone subdued. "You were right, Sophie. I've spent so much of my life chasing power and control that I've lost sight of what truly matters." Sophie paused, her hands still in the soil. She looked up at him, her expression guarded. "And what do you think truly matters, Eric?" He sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his confession. "Family, connection, the ability to admit when you're wrong and to do better. I want to make things right with you and Logan, but I know that's not something I can demand or expect." Sophie wiped her hands and stood, meeting his gaze. "Eric, I don't know if I'll ever forget the way you treated me when I first came into this family, but I also believe people can change. If you're willing to try, then maybe we can work towards something better." The sincerity in her voice seemed to move him, and for the first time, Eric smiled, not out of condescension or formality, but out of genuine hope. "Thank you, Sophie. That means more than you know." Meanwhile, Logan had his own reckoning to face. Inspired by Sophie's courage, he decided it was time to revisit his father's business. Not as a passive observer, but as a leader with his own vision. He proposed restructuring the company to focus on sustainability and community engagement, an idea that initially met resistance from the board. Eric, however, surprised everyone by supporting Logan's proposal. "It's time for a new direction," he said during a meeting. "Logan is the future of this family, and I trust his judgment." The shift in Eric's attitude signaled a deeper transformation. He began stepping back from the business, allowing Logan the freedom to lead. For Logan, this was a bittersweet victory. He had always wanted his father's approval, but he now realized that true fulfillment came from building something meaningful, not from seeking validation. As the business adapted to its new mission, Sophie found herself becoming more involved in its initiatives. Her background and experiences gave her a unique perspective, and Logan encouraged her to take on a formal role as a consultant for community outreach projects. Sophie hesitated at first, unsure if she could balance her art with this new responsibility. But Logan's unwavering faith in her capabilities convinced her to try. Together, they launched programs to support local artists and small businesses, turning the company into a force for good. Sophie's story of resilience and creativity became a symbol of the company's new ethos, inspiring others to believe in the power of change. The mansion, once a symbol of division, began to reflect the family's transformation. Sophie and Logan hosted monthly gatherings for artists, entrepreneurs, and community members, filling the grand halls with laughter and conversation. Even Eric, who had once avoided such events, began to participate, finding joy in seeing the positive impact his family was making. One evening, as Sophie and Logan sat by the fireplace, Logan handed her a small, wrapped box. "What's this?" she asked. Her curiosity piqued. "Just open it," he said, his eyes twinkling. Inside was a beautifully bound journal with her name engraved on the cover. Sophie traced her fingers over the letters, touched by the thoughtful gift. "It's perfect," she whispered. Logan smiled. "I thought it could be a place for you to capture all the dreams and ideas you've brought to life. You've done so much, Sophie, and I want you to have a space to reflect on everything you've accomplished." Tears filled her eyes as she leaned into him. "You always know how to make me feel seen, Logan. Thank you." Their journey had been anything but easy, but in that moment, Sophie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life they were building. They had faced countless challenges, some from the outside world, others from within, but they had come out stronger, united by a love that defied expectations. Eric, too, found his own peace. He began writing a memoir, documenting his journey from a man consumed by ambition to someone learning to value relationships and humility. He hoped his story could serve as a cautionary tale for others, a reminder that redemption was always possible, no matter how far one had strayed. As the months turned into years, the Townsend family continued to evolve. Sophie's art flourished, her work gaining recognition not just for its beauty, but for the powerful stories it told. Logan's leadership brought new life to the company, and their shared vision turned it into a beacon of hope and opportunity. Sophie often reflected on how far they had come, marveling at the unlikely path that had brought them together. The girl who had once been dismissed as a beggar now stood as a beloved artist, a devoted wife, and a catalyst for change. And alongside her was Logan, the man who had dared to defy convention and believe in a love worth fighting for. In the end, the Townsend legacy became one of resilience, redemption, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. Together, Sophie, Logan, and even Eric proved that no matter how flawed the past, the future was always full of possibility. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of love, forgiveness, and growth. Stories like Sophie and Logan's remind us that even in the face of life's greatest challenges, hope and redemption are always possible. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring narratives. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters to us. Until next time, stay empathetic,